the basic idea here is that virginity scandalized this order because the paterfamilias within a Roman family basically signified the continuity of the Roman Empire. Like, we will transmit respect for the gods to our children. We will have children, and we will give them love of the emperor. We will, the same devotion we have to this empire, we will implant in our children. So actual procreation and then the reproduction of the social order were kind of meshed into one.
So it's like a state duty.
Yeah, it's a state duty. And you would be...
Or nation, because I didn't have that.
Yeah, and in some ways, in this particular time, it really mirrors more like the nation of Israel, where, you know, there's that rabbinic saying, I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, but to refuse to procreate is akin to shedding blood. Because within this idea of the nation, the individual really is subordinate to his nation. So to not procreate, to not keep in continuity this worldly nation, is
it's a betrayal of your people.
Precisely.
So then Christianity shows up, and then
deeply scandalous.
People are abandoning the institution of marriage,
and in fact,
to be celibate.
Right, and it was even, he's really great at the history here, because it wasn't just like they were showing up. They were actually showing up to tell the Roman order, don't worry, we still love marriage. They were being trying to be conservative, especially the bishops and leaders of the church. They're trying to say, like, whoa, don't kill us. We are, I promise, we're a part of this thing too, we're part of this world. But it really did have virginity. And this really was a great scandal, because in the Virgin, you have the person who says the social order ends with me, who says that, I mean, it can sound incredibly arrogant from a Roman perspective. It's like saying, I am it. There's not a future here that I'm going to bestow onto others. I find a perfection
There's a fulfillment
in just how I'm created, and I'm going to die like this. Now, obviously, that could be a perversion, right? Like, I think
really arrogant.
That could be really arrogant. That could be really selfish. I understand why the Romans were probably shocked by this, right? And it took a long time for Christianity to be able to express the worth of holiness and that kind of merit that says, yeah, I am loved by God, so my life has a certain completeness within itself, but that this is, as, you know, this is part of the entirely new social order. This is not just against the Roman Empire. It's also the building of the new Christian order, which actively seeks to produce people who are signs of the great love God has for each one of us in particular. So when all of which is to say, when Luther is, you know, rejecting the image of the Virgin that has been so painstakingly established within Christianity, inevitably, what falls out is a repetition in some ways of that same ideal. So now, if virginity is not a possibility of life, and everyone is supposed to be married, then several things happen. I mean, one of the main things that happens is procreation becomes reinscribed as a duty to the state,
right,
and as something that you do in justice. And Luther actually makes these kinds of arguments throughout the treatise.
Right. I mean, he has like the idea that like that you ought to get married, you ought to take a wife, you like ought to fulfill this duty, but for him it wasn't to the state, it was to God.
Yeah.
God desires you to procreate, and so this is your role. This is the thing that you ought to do, and that's part of why I think he was able to convince. I think this religious order did end up following his advice, and why he was so successful is because he was telling people, look, not only is celibacy an unnatural state, and that this that marriage is more chaste, so now you're not sinning, but like you will actually be like fighting against the devil. Like you are actually doing the thing for God. Like you are fighting the battle for God by taking a wife and having children, which again isn't totally wrong, but it does end up sliding or constricting your cultural imagination. So now, if this grace of virginity is just for like a teeny tiny select few individuals who are going to be like St. Paul's or just these random hermits, then the meaning of my gender, the meaning of my vocation is going to be tied to this duty of procreating and having children.
And that, I think, is the second thing that you see as an immediate fallout. Once gender can only really mean procreation, except by a sort of miraculous exception, then everything that is gendered about you, so everything that goes into being a woman or being a man, can be reduced fundamentally to the purpose of procreation. So it always has reference to a functional role. And this function of procreation is sort of the ceiling of what it all means. Whereas with the image of the Virgin, you had this great mystery. And it's really important. It's like, I love the image you made of the roof being torn off the building, because it's not the case that gender wasn't for procreation, and gender isn't the obvious, procreation isn't the obvious way to understand what gender is and what it means. It's that in the image of the Virgin, there's the possibility of attaining the perfection of human life, not through procreation, and not just as a sacrifice, as if you simply say, well, I sort of see that and I cut it off for higher things, but as an actual mode of perfection, of flourishing, of happiness, of human life.